Today we're going to be going over nouns and gender in Spanish. Now, it's first important to define a noun and to know what a noun is. A noun is a person, a place, or a thing. You may remember learning that from a long time ago when you were in elementary school, so it's going to be the same in Spanish. Now, one thing to note is that nouns are extremely important as they're in almost every single sentence. But another thing to note is the fact that they're going to work a bit differently in Spanish as opposed to English. And the reason why is because every single noun has a gender in Spanish. So basically what I mean by gender is that everything is either masculine or feminine. Everything's considered a guy or a girl. And yes, that's even objects. It includes places and things. So it makes sense for people, right? If I were to say actor versus actress, actor implies that we're talking about a male, and actress implies that we're talking about a female. But the thing is, in Spanish, even places and things contain gender within them. And so everything is classified as either masculine or feminine. Now, the way that I kind of like to talk about this is that there's no such thing as it in Spanish. You can think as if every single object is personified in a way that we will know the gender of exactly what we're talking about. So, an example of this in English would be, let's say if there's a person who really likes his car, and he says, "Oh, she runs very well. I'll drive her for miles," right? And so you can see that he's actually personifying this object. He's calling it a she and a her. And so think about in Spanish, essentially they do that with every single object. So that can seem a little bit weird at first, but after a while it starts to make a little sense. And just think about the idea that there's no such thing as it in Spanish. Everything's known as a guy or a girl. So overall, in general, things that are known as guys will tend to end in O, things that are known as girls will tend to end in A, and things that are gender neutral will tend to end in E and E. And although these aren't the only endings, these are the most common. If you want to take a look at some of the other ones, here they are right here. But I would say about 80% of the time you'll see nouns ending in either an O, an A, or an E. So continuing on, one thing we also have to know about is singular versus plural. Singular means one, plural means many. And the reason why I'm talking about singular versus plural and masculine versus feminine is because it basically influences what will be going on around it. So, for example, if I were to say carro, means car in Spanish. If I wanted to say the car, I would say el carro. But if I wanted to say the table, mesa, you can now see that carro is masculine, mesa is feminine, and so what we're doing now is we're actually going to use a different form of the, which I'll go over in the next video in more detail. But you can see how the gender of it is actually influencing what's going on around it. Now, another thing too is if I were to say the fast car, carro rápido, you can see that it's ending in an O, just like carro. But if I were to say, let's say the tall table, this could not be alto, this would have to be alta. And so you can see essentially what we're doing is the form of the is getting changed and the ending of the adjective is getting changed in order to match exactly the gender that we're talking about for the noun. Now, another thing to note is the fact that if we change it to being plural, los carros have to be los carros rápidos. So you can see that now that we've made it masculine and plural, everything around it is also going to change in order to be in the masculine plural form. So if we said la mesa es alta, that would not work. We'd have to say las mesas altas. So overall, masculine and feminine, what they do is they have a lot of influence on what's being put around the noun. Now, one more thing to look at is gender neutral. Gender neutral is very interesting because if we're talking about people, for persons, it works a little bit different than places and things. So let's say if I were to say el cantante, that means the singer. Now the thing is, we could also say la cantante, which will also mean the singer, But in this case, we're using a masculine form of the. In this case, we're using a feminine form of the. And because of that, we know that this is a male singer and this is a female singer. When we're switching the gender between people, the gender of the noun is going to be affected. However, where it gets a little weird is when we talk about places and things. For example, if I were to say el puente versus la clase, you can see that they both end in E. They're both considered quote-unquote gender neutral, but this one's going to be masculine and this one's going to be feminine. The reason why we call this gender neutral is because the A can signify either something being masculine or feminine. For people, it can switch between whether we're talking about a guy or a girl, for example with el or la cantante. But when we're talking about places and things, unfortunately we just have to memorize whether this is going to be masculine or whether this is going to be feminine, because obviously it's not like there's two genders for a bridge in English. And so overall, with a lot of objects, what you're just going to have to do is memorize whether they are masculine or feminine. Versus with people, it's easy, right? If it's a guy, it's going to be masculine. If it's a girl, it's going to be feminine. But with the objects, overall, what you can do is if you have an O, it'll likely be masculine. If you have an A, it'll likely be feminine. If you have an E, you probably have to memorize it. And then here are going to be all the other endings as well, if you'd like to take a look at these. And so overall, with nouns and gender, you can see that they work a little bit different in Spanish than they do in English. And they also tend to influence a lot of things going on around it. But it's also important to note that it's not as tricky as you think, as long as you just can recognize the pattern that A is going to be feminine and O is going to be masculine. Thanks. See you in the next one.